The movie begins with Agent Rick interrogating a young boy named Tony, Violet's love interest. Rick asks him about Violet and he tells her how he asked her on a date, and when he arrived at the theater he saw a superhero get upset and take off her mask. He finds out that the girl is Violet and runs away when she approaches him. Tony tells Rick he wishes he never saw her in her costume, and Rick places a device on his head. The Parr family, secretly the superhero family known as the Incredibles, fights a villain named the Underminer as he uses his giant drill to send a bank underground and steal the money in it. The Underminer escapes and sets his machine loose as it heads for the city hall. Helen, the superhero Elastigirl, and her husband Bob, who is Mr. Incredible, stop the machine from the inside. At the same time, Lucius, also known as Frozone, uses his ice powers to stop it from hitting the city hall. They successfully stop the machine, and Violet uses her force field to shield them as it explodes. Frozone sees the police coming and he escapes while the Incredibles get apprehended because the government has banned being a superhero. Elastigirl and Mr. Incredible are taken to an interrogation room where some officers scold them. The officers inform them that things would have gone better if they didn't get involved with the robbery. Rick takes the Incredibles to a motel, and as they step out of the van, he informs Bob and Helen that the government has canceled the superhero funding program and they won't be able to get money. They thank him for his help, and he wishes them luck as he drives away. That night, Violet gets the family to talk about what happened that day, and Helen informs them that being a superhero is illegal and that they have to respect the law. She gets into an argument with Bob, who thinks the law is unjust. Helen and Bob talk beside the pool, thinking of how they'll make money and move out of the motel. Lucius walks to them and apologizes for running away while the police arrest him. He informs them that an investor who's interested in superheroes approached him. He gives them the business card and tells them they'll meet him that night and have to wear their old superhero costumes. Lucius, Helen, and Bob enter a building and meet Winston Dever. He introduces himself to them as a huge fan and introduces them to his sister Evelyn. Winston talks about how his dad loved superheroes but was killed by a burglar while trying to call them, who were hiding because they were illegal. Evelyn tells them their mother died a few months later due to a heartbreak. Winston talks about his company DevTech. He informs them that they can change people's perceptions of superheroes by letting the people see how they fight crime through tiny cameras installed in their suits. Winston says he'll need Helen to go on their first assignments because she amounts to less destruction while fighting crime. Helen and Bob return home, and Helen is skeptical of accepting Winston's offer. Bob informs her he'll take care of the kids while she works with Winston to make superheroes legal again. Helen calls Winston and tells him she'll join his program. The Incredibles are taken to a fantasy house, and Winston informs them that it's a house he's not even using. He asks them to stay in the house as long as they like. Helen puts on her new suit and finds a new motorcycle in the garage. She leaves the house and rides to the airport where she meets Winston and Evelyn. They fly to a nearby city where Helen waits in an alley while Winston and Evelyn check for any crime happening in the area. They receive news of a new train's potential hijacking and Helen rides to the location. She watches as the train takes off but stops and suddenly begins going in the wrong direction. Helen follows the train and uses her elastic powers to stop it from falling off the tracks. She enters the control room and sees writing from a supervillain named the Screenslaver. Meanwhile, Bob has a hard time taking care of the kids. Violet returns home and locks herself in her room because Tony didn't show up for their date. Jack fights a raccoon and uses his abilities to scare it away. Bob finds him outside the house and realizes he has abilities. Bob talks to Helen and she gets excited as she tells him about her day. He doesn't tell her about Jack's abilities and tells her he's doing fine with the kids. The following day, Violet goes to school and talks to Tony, who behaves like he doesn't know who she is. Helen prepares for an interview and talks to an ambassador. During the interview, the anchor man gets controlled by the Screenslaver and informs Helen that he will hijack the ambassador's helicopter. She slingshots into one of the helicopters and makes her way to the ambassador's helicopter. She frees the pilot from his hallucination and pushes the crew members into the water. The ambassador cannot swim, so Helen jumps out with her as the plane crashes into a construction site. The following morning, Violet tells Bob that Tony doesn't remember who she is. Bob informs her that Rick erased Tony's memories of her by accident, and Violet gets upset and tells him she hates superheroes. Meanwhile, Helen meets Winston and he informs her that they're getting closer to making superheroes legal. Helen informs him that she's not happy because she has not apprehended the screenslaver. Winston takes her to a room and introduces her to other superheroes she has inspired. They have fun for some time and Winston leaves while Helen talks to Evelyn. Helen and Evelyn talk and Helen informs her that she has a plan to catch the screenslaver. Meanwhile, Bob takes Violet and the others to the restaurant where Tony works and tries to get Tony to remember Violet, but she embarrasses herself and leaves. Helen continues her interview, but she isn't physically present. The screenslaver hijacks the interview and Helen uses a gadget made by Evelyn to track him. She goes to a building, enters a room where she sees multiple equipment, and realizes it's the screenslaver's lair. Helen walks into a cage and the screenslaver appears behind her. The walls become a hypnotizing illusion and Helen has to fight with her eyes closed. She pushes the screenslaver out of the cage and pursues him as he runs away. She catches him as he jumps out of the building and the room explodes. Helen takes off his mask and the man asks what's happening. The police apprehend the screenslaver while Helen commends Evelyn's gadget. Bob sees his car, the Incredible, at a private auction, and he tries to retrieve it, but changes his mind because he doesn't want to distract Helen from her work. Jack falls into Violet's room and Bob tells the kids he has powers. They ask him too many questions and he yells because he's frustrated. Lucius arrives at the house and realizes Bob is stressed. He sees that Jack has multiple abilities and suggests that Bob find a babysitter while he rests for a bit. Bob arrives at Edna's house with Jack, but she's reluctant to babysit. She then sees that Jack has multiple abilities, and changes her mind quickly, deciding to take care of him for the night. Meanwhile, Helen attends to an occasion where Winston announces they'll be having a global conference on his cruise ship. Helen gets uncomfortable because catching the screenslaver was easier than expected. She walks into a surveillance room where she talks to Evelyn as she watches the videos of capturing screenslaver. Helen discovers that someone in the company is working with the screenslaver, and Evelyn hypnotizes her. Bob wakes up on the couch and Violet serves him breakfast. He goes to Edna's house and she gives Jack a superhero costume to help Bob observe Jack and know when he is about to activate his abilities. Helen wakes up and tries removing the hypnotizing mask but cannot stretch because she's in a frozen room. Evelyn emerges and reveals that she is the screenslaver. She blames the death of her parents on their dependence on superheroes and says she will ensure that superheroes remain illegal. Evelyn informs Helen that she will use her to make superheroes illegal forever, and she turns on the hypnotizing mask. While teaching the kids how to monitor Jack's powers, Bob gets a call from Evelyn. Evelyn tells him that Helen is in trouble and asks him to meet her. Bob suits up and asks Lucius to watch the kids while he goes to help Helen. Some superheroes wearing hypnotizing masks knock on the door and Lucius stops them from entering. He realizes they aren't normal and he uses his powers as he helps the kids escape. Dash calls the Incredimobile and gets hypnotized while the kids escape. Bob meets Evelyn and she takes him into a room. Helen fights him and eventually places the hypnotizing mask on him. Violet stops the Incredimobile and informs Dash that their parents have been hypnotized and they don't know how to save them. Dash tells her that they have the car and their superpowers. Jack warps reality in the car and the kids realize that they can use him to save their parents. Violet asks the Incredimobile to take them to DevTech. The kids get to the ship and use the car's ejector seats to get on board. Winston welcomes all the guests while Violet moves around the ship and searches for her parents. A hypnotized hero spots her, but Violet knocks her down. Bob, Helen, and Lucius walk to the hall, and while taking a group photo, the screen hypnotizes everyone while Bob and Helen announce that they are taking over the ship. They hijack the ship and change its course to the city. Violet and Dash search for Jack while the hypnotized superheroes search for them. The heroes find them, but Jack knocks them down as he gets gigantic. The kids enter the control room and find their hypnotized parents. They attack the kids, but Jack floats to Helen and uses his telekinesis to remove her mask. She realizes where she is and fights Bob and Lucius while she takes off their masks. Helen realizes the kids save them and they embrace. She informs the others that Evelyn is the screenslaver. The other hypnotized heroes arrive and a fight ensues. The family fights and removes their masks while Evelyn watches from the control room. She walks into the main hall and takes Winston. They walk into a jet and Evelyn tries taking off. Winston realizes she's the bad guy and jumps out of the jet. Lucius and the others try to stop the ship because Bob destroyed the controls while he was hypnotized. Bob gets attacked by a superhero who can crush objects, and Bob knocks him out. Helen gets on the jet and Evelyn sees her. Evelyn begins flying higher and Helen cannot breathe due to a lack of oxygen. Bob and the others decide to move the ship away from the city, and Bob goes underwater to move the rudder while Lucius uses his ice to change the ship's direction. Helen opens the window using a flare gun and Evelyn gets dragged out. She puts the jet on autopilot and jumps out to save Evelyn. Helen successfully saves Evelyn and they move the ship while Lucius uses his ice to stop it from hitting a building. Evelyn gets arrested and Winston apologizes for what she did. Dash calls the car, but Bob takes the remote from him. Later they enter a courtroom where the judge announces that superheroes are no longer illegal. Violet meets Tony in school and they begin to bond as they talk. Violet and her family pick Tony up from his house and Violet introduces Tony to her family. They drive to the theater and as Tony gets down, they see some robbers in a car. Violet tells Tony she'll be back, and they drive off while putting on their masks and pursuing the criminals. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap that bell icon to be notified about our latest videos. We'll see you next time.